All right, today I want you to open your books. We're going to continue looking at some of the introductory material here. And let's look at page 11. Oh, we were still reading some things here on page 11, so let's go back to that. So on page 11, we're reading about biblical principles and history. These are some important things for us to have in our minds as we proceed. So page 11 at the bottom, biblical principles and history. Are we there? You ready? Zach, you want to start us off in the first paragraph, please?
For the Christian, the proper study of history.
Are you at the bottom of page 11?
Page 11. The biblical record they take delight in pointing out.
No, I'm not sure.
Oh, bottom.
The very bottom, yes.
Okay. Where
it says biblical principles in history. Okay, read that first
The
paragraph.
Bible is our guide to history. It provides principles that help us to better understand and interpret historical events.
Okay, so we're going to look at is concerning God, and then you look in the next page, concerning man, and then concerning the plan of history. So those are the three areas we're going to be looking at here under biblical principles and history. So first of all, concerning God.
God controls history. He is omniscient and omnipresent.
Okay, a couple big words there. Do we know what those words mean? Anybody know what omniscient means? What does the omni part mean? What is the omni? Omni means all. S-C-I-E-N-T. Does that sound familiar? You know any other words like that that have some of the same letters?
Science.
Science. And science means knowledge. So omniscient means he is all-knowing. He knows everything. Okay? And the next word was omnipresent. Now, is that a little easier to figure out? What's that mean?
Everywhere.
He's everywhere. He's all present. Okay, continue from there, Amelia.
He knows everything, and his watchful eyes oversees all his creation. He is omnipotent.
Okay, there's another one. Omnipotent is how we usually say it, although it is made up of the word omni and potent. What does potent mean? If something is potent, what is it?
Strong smell.
So strong wouldn't have to necessarily be a smell, it could be anything. Something was strong, powerful is potent. So what would be omnipotent? Omnipotent or omnipotent mean?
Powerful. Very strong.
He's all powerful. Nothing has more power than he does. So he is all knowing, he is everywhere, all present, and he is all powerful. All right, continue.
His powerful hand directs the course of history. He moves the hearts of men and establishes the bounds of nations. The forces of nature do his bidding.
All right, so God controls history. That's a really important thing for us to remember and keep in mind. Okay, the next part of concerning God.
God's dealing with people and nations reveals his character, his holiness, justice, love, mercy, and long-suffering. Though God may deal with people and nations in different ways, God does not change in his character and purpose. He is the same yesterday and today and forever.
All right, some people say at times, there's nothing God can't do. That's not exactly true. He can't go against his own character. So he can't sin. He can't do that which is wrong. So technically, there are some things God can't do. And this paragraph is pointing out that when God deals with people and nations, it does reveal his character. And Amelia read the different words that are used to describe his character. And so even though he may deal with different nations and peoples in different ways, he doesn't ever go against his own character. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever because his character does not change. Okay, does that make sense? All right, the third point then.
God blesses all people and nations who choose to obey and honor him.
Okay, that probably goes without saying, right? There's some verses there to back that up. Okay, number 4.
God brings judgment upon people and nations who choose to disobey, ignore, or dishonor him.
So, if people or nations obey and honor him, God brings blessing. If they choose to disobey, dishonor, then he brings judgment. Okay, next concerning man. So we've seen concerning God. And the most important thing there is that he is sovereign and that he always acts according to his character. Concerning man,
Man is a created being. For this reason, man is dependent upon the responsibility to his creator. God created man to glorify himself.
and if you read those verses that are cited there, you'll see the reason that we exist is not for our own benefit, it's to glorify God, to bring glory to him. That's our total reason for and our purpose for living. All right, number 2.
Man fell from his original state. Sin broke his fellowship with God. Man in his sinful state cannot please God. He is in need of a Savior.
Okay, does anybody know what that's called when Adam and Eve fell from their original state of innocence into sin? The fall, right, good. And all of mankind has been affected by that ever since. And you can read the verses there if you'd like to understand that further. So we need a Savior because we're all born in a sinful state. Okay, number 3. Back to Zach.
Man is to choose his own way. He chooses to glorify his Creator, though, through faith and obedience, he will enjoy him forever. If he chooses to dishonor him through disbelief and disobedience, he will suffer everlasting punishment. Though man has a free will, he is never free from God's sovereign control.
Okay, so a good balance there. All right, number 4, Amelia.
Man was made in the image of God, possesses God-given talents and abilities.
Oh, you skipped a line.
Oh, sorry. Man possesses God.
No,
Oh,
go,
wait,
start
sorry.
over again.
Okay. Man was made in the image of God. Though this image has been married by
It's
marred
marred.
by sin.
What's it mean to be marred by something? Can you tell by the context? He's marred by sin. If you've ever been in an accident, you may have been marred.
Hurt.
Hmm?
Hurt.
Hurt? No, a little more than that. It has to do with your appearance. If something is marred, maybe you buy a piece of furniture and it's got scratches on it.
Scar.
It's been marred. It's got scars. It's got damage. So we've been damaged by sin. The image of God in us. So the image of God in us is not readily apparent because we also are sinners. And so you really can't see God in us. It's been marred. Okay, go ahead.
Man possesses God-given talents and abilities through which he can accomplish remarkable things. But man's achievements, no matter how remarkable they may be, do not change the sinfulness of the human heart.
Okay, so no matter how much we may accomplish, that doesn't change who we are on the inside. That takes God to do that. Okay, now concerning the plan of history.
God has a plan for history. History is not accidental, it is providential. Known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world. History demonstrates God's desire to rescue men from their fallen state and restore them unto himself.
All right, God has a plan for history. God's not up there wondering, like we do watching a movie or something, wonder what's going to happen next. No, God has it planned out. And at the same time, we have the freedom of will to decide things. But God already has planned all those things, all of history. So that when we look at history, we see not only what has man done, what has happened, what are the events of history, but also we see God's plan because we know that it happened just like he planned it. That's hard for us to comprehend. But just because something is hard to comprehend doesn't mean it's not true, right? Okay, next one.
Christ is the center of God's plan. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
All right, so everything that God's plan involves centers around Christ, the second person of the Godhead. Okay, number 3.
The Bible reveals God's perfect plan and will for men and nations.
Correct. And number 4.
Satan opposes God's plan. History reveals that conflict between God and Satan, between righteousness and unrighteousness, between the godly and the ungodly.
All right, so we know there's opposition, there's an enemy. Okay, so we've seen here as we look at the biblical principles in history that there are certain things we understand concerning God, certain things concerning man, and certain things that we've seen concerning the plan of history. And that's kind of our guiding principle as we look through world history. Okay, let's go to page 13, History and You. And let's read that together. Well, I'll tell you what. I think that's really telling you, the benefits of studying history, but you don't have any choice in the matter. So let's just skip down to the very bottom of the page, where you see the last paragraph begins with Cicero. Cicero, the famed orator of the Roman Republic, once said, "He who knows only his own generations remains forever a child." Think about that. If you only know what's going on now in your life, you're never going to mature into a productive adult. You need to know what's happened in the past. So many people today, young people, are being fooled into thinking certain things because they don't know the past. They don't know what's happened before. Okay, let's go to the next page now, which is page 14 and the beginning of Unit 1, the ancient world. You look on those 2 pages, that's a picture of a city. Does anybody know what city that is? John?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, right. And on the left-hand side, there is a box around a particular building. Does anyone recognize that building? Okay, is John the only one that's ever seen pictures of Jerusalem? Okay, John, what is it?
The temple.
No, it's not the temple. This is a picture taken, and the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, so we have no pictures. But it's on the Temple Mount where the temple was, but the temple's no longer there. If you look to the right of the flat area where that building is, over on the page 15, and you can see where the flat area kind of ends, and there's some structure sticking up a little bit. That area, from about where the page ends, maybe a little on the left of it, all the way over, was where the temple once stood, but it's not there anymore. So what is that that's on the Temple Mount area, where the temple's supposed to be, or where it was? What do you see? What's on top of that building? A dome. And so it's called the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock. How many of you have ever heard of that? And what kind of people own the Dome of the Rock? Muslims. They control that area. The Dome of the Rock is not a place where Muslims meet, a place of worship, what we call a mosque. There's a mosque next to it, but the Dome of the Rock is simply a building commemorating where they say Abraham sacrificed Ishmael. And if that doesn't sound right, you'll have to wait till we get to studying Islam. We'll tell the true story there. But that's called the Dome of the Rock, and that's Jerusalem. Now, you see the wall there in front, all the way across? You see that wall? That is on the eastern side of Jerusalem. And you see on the right-hand page, there is a gate that is blocked off, it's filled in. You see that little part that's taller than the rest, and there's some, it looks like a doorway, a double doorway. Does everybody see that? That's called the Eastern Gate. And that was blocked up many centuries ago. Down below the wall, closer to us, where the picture is being taken, is called the Kidron Valley. Have you ever heard that? The Kidron Valley. Where the picture is being taken is probably the Mount of Olives, where Jesus spent a lot of time, and it's in the Mount of Olives that the Garden of Gethsemane is located. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting look at that. Now, why picture Jerusalem? Well, Jerusalem figures very heavily in the ancient world, and especially for those of us that follow the Bible. All right, turn on the next page, and you see a timeline, and this gives us an overview of the ancient world. The very top of the timeline, you see the Fertile Crescent. We'll talk about what that is. But if you look across, you see different peoples that lived in the Fertile Crescent that will be studied, different civilizations. We had the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and you see there on the bottom, that's when Abraham was around. We have the Amorites, the Hittites, Phoenicians, Aramaeans, Assyrians, Lydians, Chaldeans, Persians, and then we finally get up to the birth of Christ, the crucifixion, and the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, what we will do is make our way through the Fertile Crescent, and at a certain point, we will stop basically when we get up to the Persians. And then we'll come back and start kind of over again with Egypt. But notice when we start with Egypt, we don't start back as far. We start a little bit further up, and we go Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, and so on. And then we'll come back to Greece. And we start about the same place with Greece, with really a pre-Greek civilization, the Minoan civilization, and then up the Mycenaean, and then we get into the real Greek culture. And then we go to Rome, and we start over again, but not nearly so far back. So this is how we're going to have to operate. We can't cover, well, we could, but it would be very confusing to cover all of the civilizations of the ancient world chronologically. So we're going back and forth between Egypt and Persia and whatever. We cover one area of the world all the way through, and then we come back and start the next one, like Egypt, and go through. And then we come back, not quite as far, but to Greece and follow. Okay, that's going to be a procedure. So we're going to be going through the same time period several times, but with a different civilization each time. So hopefully that'll help us keep things straight for that civilization, even if it's overlapping in time with other ones. You understand what I'm saying? So we'll try to keep that in perspective too as we go, and point out that, okay, this is happening in Egypt, but at the same time, here's what was happening in other civilizations. So to kind of give us our bearings there. All right, so that is the timeline. You can refer back to that if you need to in order to see where we are or where we're going or where we have been. Now, I want you to turn to page 19. Well, let's look at page 18 first. We have a picture there, beginning of chapter 1, which is called Early Civilizations. What's in this picture? If you haven't answered a question yet today, this is the one to answer. What's in this picture?
Sheep.
Sheep. Good. And what else? A shepherd. Why would the authors put a picture of a shepherd and sheep in the first page of a chapter on early civilizations? What do you think, Zach?
Represent Moses.
Okay, certainly Moses was a shepherd, right?
Maybe to represent Jesus, because we're the lambs and he's leading us.
Okay, that's true. You guys are being very symbolic. Or is it just because in the ancient world a lot of people had sheep? And a lot of people were shepherds. Okay, maybe you guys are right. I don't know, but I'm just pointing out that was the situation in the ancient world. A lot of sheep, a lot of shepherds. And you can point out to a lot of people in the Bible that were shepherds, right? That's why Jesus called himself the Good Shepherd. All right. Now, as we go further here, let's look at page 19. Excuse me. And the box at the top. And let's look at that box together. Everybody there? Page 19, the box. Evolutionists believe that man descended from lower forms of life, that he developed from the simple to the complex. You've heard that, I'm sure. They contend that man was on the earth for millions of years before he was capable of building a civilization. Their conception of man's origin and nature is entirely false. The Bible tells us that God created man as a mature, intelligent being. Man did not evolve over millions of years, as some would have us believe. God placed him in a fully grown world, rich in vegetation, fertile soil, and mineral resources. Using the intelligence and abilities that God had given him, man established the first civilization shortly after his expulsion from the Garden of Eden. This chapter is the story of God's creative work and man's early civilizations. I picked up this book some time ago that was being thrown out by a library. And it's called Fossils Tell of Long Ago. And this is indicative of the kind of materials that children are given in schools and on television. And I thought it was interesting. It starts out here. Once upon a time, a huge fish was swimming around when along came a smaller fish. The big fish was so hungry, it swallowed the other fish whole. The big fish died and sank to the bottom of the sea. This happened 90 million years ago, it says. How do we know? They asked the question, how do we know? That's a good question. They say the answer is we know because the fish turned to stone. The fish became a fossil. A plant or animal that has turned to stone is called a fossil. Now here's the real answer to the question. How do we know? Scientists can tell us how old stones are. They could tell us how old the fish fossil was. And then goes on to tell about how a fish becomes a fossil. Is it necessary in order for a fish to be a fossil for it to have lived 90 million years ago? No. In fact, their explanation of fish becoming fossils, along with other animals, doesn't make a lot of sense either. They want us to believe that the fish died and sunk to the bottom and somehow was covered over by sand, by earth, by dirt, and eventually became fossilized. That's not normally how something gets fossilized. Because what happens normally when a fish dies? And have you ever had fish in an aquarium? What happens when a fish dies in your aquarium?
They float to the top.
Usually they float to the top, don't they? And especially if you do as I did one time when I had a class and had fish in the aquarium, and we decided that one of the students had dumped too much food in the aquarium, so started getting fungus on the bottom. So we need to clean out this aquarium. So some of the boys took the aquarium outside and were dumping out all the water and the gravel in and trying to clean it out. Meanwhile, I had taken the fish out of the tank and put it in like a little glass coffee pot. Well, I was concerned that the water would get too cold. I really wasn't thinking very clearly. And so I put the heater in the coffee pot too. Well, then I got busy with the kids getting the aquarium cleaned out. The guys that were taking it outside, as I said. And then I remembered, oh, the fish in the coffee pot. So it was in a different room. I went in the other room, and guess what was happening? The water was boiling. So what happened to the fish?
Died.
They died. Some of their guts were hanging out even. And what did they do? They floated to the top. So I know that happens.
Some nice boiled
Well,
fish.
I thought, okay, I'll just have to buy some more fish. But then the guys came in from outside and said, we were trying to get the gravel out of the bottom of the aquarium, but because it was wet and it was stuck to it, so we hit the bottom and we broke it.
Wow.
So I had no more aquarium either, so I said, okay, forget it. No more fish, no more aquarium. But I've had another aquarium since then. In fact, I used to have a 50-gallon one in here. It was big. But when fish die, they generally float to the top. Now, sometimes they sink. But if they do sink, what happens to them?
They sink.
If they do sink onto the bottom, what happens to them? They get covered over by dirt usually. They get eaten by other fish, right? They get eaten. So there's not anything left usually to even make a fossil. All right. As you'll find out in this class, I believe, and our text believes, that the fossils primarily were created not millions of years ago, but a few thousand years ago. And what was it that caused all the fossils to be buried? The flood, the Great Flood, Noah's flood. How many of you are familiar with Ken Ham? Yeah, I know I won't say it exactly, but what does he say? He says that, what would you expect if there was a worldwide flood? You'd expect to find millions of dead things buried in layers all over the world. He says, and what do we find? We find millions of dead things buried in layers all over the world. Just what you'd expect if there was a worldwide flood. And yet, scientists won't accept it. But that is the reality. That is the truth. All right. On Monday, we're going to use our Bibles some, so make sure you bring your Bible on Monday. Okay? Remember that? Okay, write it on your hand or on your, better yet, your assignment book. That's where it goes, right? I was kidding about the hand, because you're going to wash your hand before Monday. So right in there, bring your Bible so that we have those on hand as we go into the next part of our study together and looking at world history. Oh, by the way, I wanted to point out too, there are posters up here that I put here for your benefit. Here's one that shows 3 different dinosaurs and supposedly the times in which they lived. You know, the evolutionists have all these time periods of millions of years. But what the poster says is same time, just different places. These dinosaurs lived at the same time, more or less. They just lived in different locations. That's all. That's why they're buried in different places. This poster over here shows the fossil record of Noah's flood. And it shows the different kinds of fossils that are buried and how that fits into the different activities that took place during the flood. You know, when there was a lot of rain coming down, that was different than when the rain was not there anymore and all the water was moving around, and then when the water was receding and going to its place. You know, different things happened as those were proceeding. And so it's an interesting research that's gone into locating the fossils that are in the fossil record according to what was going on in the book of Genesis during the flood. So we should always look for those kind of things. How many of you have been to the Creation Museum in Kentucky? Only one person? Okay, you look like you're not sure.
I think I might have. I can't remember.
Was it a long time ago?
Not too long ago.
Okay, so
A museum.
have none of you seen the Ark that was built down there either?
I saw that
I don't know if we can take a field trip or not, but that would be a good one. And if you haven't been there, so if we don't go, ask your parents to take you. It's phenomenal to actually see a fully sized Ark built exactly the same size that Noah built is an amazing thing. And the Creation Museum has lots of stuff in it, lots of neat shows, as well as exhibits. And, when you buy a ticket, they let you use it for 2 days. So you could spend 2 days there easily to see everything.
I know I've been to that.
You have been to the museum? Yeah. Did you see the show called Men in White? Remember that?
No.
That's pretty neat. You sit there in the theater, and I guess they've revamped it. They made it even better. I was reading. But you're watching this, and something happens on the screen in which there's water flying, and all of a sudden you feel water hitting your face. Ooh, where did that come from? So it's a pretty neat experience. So not very far away. So convince your parents to take you next summer. All right.